So last week we had a class, and I told you basically nothing, because all we did last week was establish what's going to be happening in the Sichos class. And what I explained to you last week, as they were learning the story of the Torah. The story of the Torah is the story of the creation, which applies, of course, to all humankind. The events that relate to all of humankind are Adam and Chava, and Cain and Hevel, and Charech and Shelach, and of course the flood, the Mabul, and then the day of Haflaga, the generation when all the people were scattered, separated, diversified. The second discussion in the Torah is about Hashem looking for a single tzaddik, one tzaddik, to be the father of his nation. And again, if you were here last week, you remember I discussed Eve, Job, and Avraham Avinu. And he finally identifies, he flushes out of all of humanity one family that's going to be the parents of his nation. As soon as he secures these people, what does he do next? He destroys them. He sends them to Mitzrayim, and for the most part, the Rambam writes, it was as close to being destroyed without being destroyed. Now what's the game? Hashem has a family of nations, they're all human beings, they're all the image of God, they all have to be human beings, live like Hashem wants, or live in the image of God, to reflect God in some way. Then he has, amongst all the nations, one group that is supposed to be a holy nation, and the way this holy nation is being created is that it starts in one. And then one becomes many. Thank you. Does anybody need a copy? And of course the idea is that Hashem wants a nation. And a nation means a cross-section of people, not a group of tzaddikim. A nation consists of tzaddikim, Beinyanim, and Rishayim. The worst Jew is as Jewish as Moshe Rabbeinu. That phenomena, the birth of a nation, is a process. You identify the father of the nation, Avraham Avinu, Sarah, Yitzchak, Rivka, Yaakov, Rachel, Leah, and so on. And then you have to do some kind of a deep, deep purging. That means burning out, cleaning, cleansing. That will transform them in the kind of way that any of their seed, anybody who comes from them, belongs to their group, to their category, whether they're worthy or they're not worthy. And that's the explanation, basically, underlined 3 times, for Golus Mitzrayim. Hashem isn't playing a game. The beginning of the story is he tests. And he tests Avraham Avinu impossibly. Right? And this is the story of Job that I told you. If he's going to find one person, he's going to have to be Matzoses, Levavi, Neman, Lefanecha, loyal to Hashem infinitely. Nothing the Abish is going to do is going to get him to become disloyal or not to trust. And this is how he establishes the parents of the nation. But if the parents of the nation are going to be parents of a nation, as opposed to a trickle of righteous people, they're going to have to be purged in Mitzrayim. So we go to Egypt, we become almost destroyed, and then we're born as a nation. When we come out of Mitzrayim and we get the Torah from Hashem, there's a new status. We're the chosen people. And you're chosen whether you're the biggest tzaddik or the biggest rasha, whether you're married to a Jew, you're married to a non-Jew, if you're Jewish, you're Jewish, you're Jewish. Period, end of story. That's not from Avraham Avinu. That's from Yetzias Mitzrayim. From Avraham Avinu, you're a Jew. If you're a descendant of Avraham Avinu, and you're a good guy, you listen to him. Yeah. But from Matan Torah, from Moshe Rabbeinu, you're a Jew. If you're a descendant of Avraham Avinu, no matter what you do. So the story of exile and redemption, which follows the story of Yosef and his brothers, which follows the stories of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, as I explained to you last week, is the story of how the Jewish nation is being created by fire. There's no other word. By fire, by the worst kind of suffering. They're, so to speak, purged. And I don't think this is talking about our bodies, because the people who suffer in Egypt are dead. We're their descendants. It's a spiritual thing. The genetic group, the genes, the neshama, is such after Golus Mitzrayim that those Jews in Egypt who went through the Golus Mitzrayim and suffered the way they suffered became Jewish in such a deep level that they transmit their Jewishness to their descendants, notwithstanding how they behave. This was the introduction. Okay? So I discussed a little bit about Golus Mitzrayim, and now let me bring you up to speed. Let me tell you what's going on. The Jews are in Egypt for 210 years. Of those 210 years, only 116 total are slavery years. Only 116. Why? Because as long as any of Yosef's brothers were alive, the Jews were privileged. The last of Yosef's brothers to die was Levi. He lived 137 years, I think, or something like that. And as long as he was alive, and he came to Egypt at the age of 43 or something, he lived almost 100 years in Mitzrayim. So long as he was alive, the Jews were untouched. So the entire exile, right, in the Chumash it says 430 or 400. It's not 400, it's 210. It's not 210, it's 116. That's how the numbers work. But that's not even the end. Those 116 years were not all years of slavery. Why? How do you take a group of people that are privileged, that are high society, they live in the suburbs, they live in the most fertile part of Egypt, and make them slaves? You have to trick them. The deception took 30 more years. So if the slavery is 116, the first 30 years the Jews were being treated like volunteers. This high society, the supreme class of people in Egypt were volunteering to build on behalf of the Pharaoh. In the beginning it was, let's all work together on building this huge public works project. And it took 30 years for the Egyptians to put their scheme into practice, where they would put the Jewish people into positions of subordination and put the Egyptians in positions of being their overseers, their overlords, and at the end of those 30 years, the Jews had been tricked into becoming slaves. So the years of bitter slavery in Egypt is, in quotes only, end quote, 86 years. And the remez is, the hint is, that Miriam was born. Miriam was 86 years old when the Jewish people left Egypt. Her name means bitter. Her birth marked the onset of the bitter period. In other words, her parents, Moshe Rabbeinu's parents, Miriam's parents, named her based on what was going to be. It was a prophetic thing. They prophesied that this little girl means bitterness for the Jewish people. And of course, she was there for those whole 86 years. And then she came out of Mitzrayim and danced with tupim. What do they call those things? With tambourines. When the Abisha split the Yamsuf. Okay, so 86 years the Jews were enslaved. And now I tried to illustrate this, and I really believe this. It's hard for me to convince you. I don't know if I said it last week, but I say this all the time. Auschwitz was 5 years. Imagine 86 years of Auschwitz. That's how bad it was. They kept them alive, but they were working them to death. The plan was to work them to death. They kept them alive so that they could build, and as soon as they were no useful, they died. They didn't have a gas chamber, they just let them die on the job, right? And of course the Jews refused to die. They were enslaved in the worst way. And not only they refused to die, but, continue, they multiplied. And they multiplied in ridiculous numbers. And the Egyptians don't do it themselves. They're working these people to death. This was the plan. Work them to death. And they refused to die. And they kept being more of them. So they kept using them for the public works. So you had fourth, fifth, sixth generation slaves. They knew nothing but slavery. They had no concept of a self-identity. But somehow these Jews, even after generations of this of being in Auschwitz for 86 years, still knew that they had pride, that they had a self-identity, that there was something about them that the Egyptians couldn't break. They were descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, and as we all know what the Chazal say, they didn't change their dress, they didn't change their language, and they didn't change their names. So for 86 years, they went through the worst kind of suffering. They maintained the Jewish identity in a very limited way. What does the Medrash say? Egypt was a place of 50 levels of spiritual contamination, and the Jews had sunk to only 49 of those levels. And because they hadn't descended all the way to the 50th level, they were still redeemable, and it was a matter of a fraction of a second. You wait one more minute, there's no one to redeem. And then they come out of Mitzrayim. But all of that suffering destroyed their Metzias from before and created a brand new Metzias. This new Metzias is not a handful of individual Jews who are righteous, a family of Jews. The most corrupt, the most no good. What do they call it today? OTD is just as Jewish as FFB and even BT. That's the way it works. There used to be 2 classes, now there's 3. This was the consequence of this spiritual purging. It was very physical, but it had a spiritual effect on the Jewish people in Egypt. Okay? Now, here's the part of the story which makes me crazy. So 86 years Jews suffer. There's a guy named Moses who's lived 80 of those years. He was born 6 years into this suffering. Never participated. Never suffered himself, and didn't even witness it. Why? Grew up in a palace, and the day he left the palace, he got into trouble, he ran away from Egypt, was gone for some 65, 70 years. Right? Where was Moshe during the 80 years that the Jewish people are suffering? He's either in the Pharaoh's palace, or he's someplace else. He's in Cush, he's in Ethiopia, he's in Midian, whatever, there's all kinds of midrashim where he was. At the end of the 86 years, all the Jewish people are suffering terribly. God comes to Moses, oh, by the way, go redeem the Jews. And Moshe says, me? Me? On what grounds? I didn't even see it. Aaron saw it. Miriam saw it. Miriam was 86. Aaron is 83. They suffer with the Jewish people. They were the shepherds. They were the Rebbe of the Jewish people. Aaron and Miriam. Me? Who am I? So we learned the Sicha last year, where the Rebbe says, amongst other things, that in order to redeem the Jewish people from Egypt, you could not witness the suffering. Because if you witness the suffering, the redemption would be qualified by the suffering. And the redemption has to be more than the suffering. An interesting insight that the Rebbe creates, that Dafka, someone who had no part in it, can redeem us totally from it. Because if you redeem somebody from suffering, and you yourself suffer, the redemption is, a Band-Aid's also okay. A scar is also fine. The idea that there should be no Band-Aid, no scar, never crosses your mind because you've suffered so much. But if you didn't suffer, you're very open about how free the freedom should be. So Moshe comes out of no place. Hasn't been around for 80 years. And he's the Redeemer. But the redemption doesn't happen overnight. It's a whole negotiation. Against a sipur. That goes on for 3 passions. Shmois ve'ein in the beginning of Boy. Now, according to our beliefs, if Hashem wants to take Jews out of Egypt, what does he got to do? Take Jews out of Egypt. Finished. Who's going to stop him? Who's going to stop him? Hashem wants to take Jews out of Egypt. It's very simple. You take every Jew by the hand, you walk them out of Egypt, and you dare the Egyptians to stop them. Is that what happens? No. The beginning of the story is he comes to the Pharaoh and says, please let them go. And of course the Pharaoh says no. And then starts a game of cat and mouse, which is deadly serious. That goes on for many miracles and 10 plagues. Until the Pharaoh says, okay, go, please get out of here, I don't want to see you for another second. What's the reason for the spiel? And more importantly, this spiel is so important that it's described in the Chumash as a timeless narrative. Each one of the 10 Makkos is spoken about specific. Why did it have to take 10 plagues? And most importantly, even if it took 10 plagues, why is it written in the Chumash? Who cares? It's gone. They were in Egypt. Moshe came. They left Egypt. They came to Har Sinai, got the Torah. That's enough. Why all the details? So of course the Rebbe's answer to this entire thing is a very simple thing. The Eibishter is a teacher. He's an educator. He's teaching lessons. When the Jews left Egypt, of course Hashem could have taken them out of Egypt, but that wasn't the point. The point was that Egypt should let us go. Egypt letting us go was very, very important for 2 additional reasons. And when I say the word additional, obviously the first reason Egypt had to let us go is so we should be free. But there's a second reason. What's the second reason? God was teaching Egypt something. What was God teaching Egypt? What was God teaching Egypt? There is a God. And He's stronger than you. And He controls you. And He can manipulate you any way He wishes. And when He tells you to do something, listen without being threatened. Listen without having your arms twisted. In other words, all non-Jews also have 7 laws. And as one of the girls mentioned last week, the 7 laws of Noach are really 60 or 70 laws. Right? So how do you get a guy to do 7 mitzvahs? You twist his arm until it's broken? No. You tell him. Why should he listen? Because he read the Chumash. And he knows you don't want to mess around with this God. You understand? You understand? You know the story of Nineveh? We're about to come to Yom Kippur. You know the story of Nineveh? Yeah. Yoina was sent by the Eibishter to Nineveh to tell him that in 30 days I'm turning Nineveh upside down. Now usually when God threatens, He delivers, right? Stoim and Amoira. Why is the Eibishter turning Nineveh upside down? Because they were the most morally decrepit society. So it says in Medrash that the king of Nineveh was Paray. which meant that the Pari must have lived 800 years. So I'm going to say blasphemy for today, and if it upsets you, I apologize. He was a Gilgal of Pari. He wasn't necessarily the same physical man. The point is, he knew that when the God of the Jews sends you a direct instruction from a prophet, it's a bad idea not to listen. It's a bad idea. Now, how come? Because I know that Mitzrayim was 800 years ago, but when the Eibusha sends you a prophet, and you know he's a prophet, yes, listen, in 30 days, there's going to be an eruption, that this place is going to be turned into lava. Be turned upside down. You do what he says. So the king gets off his throne and says, listen, whatever that rabbi says, we're going to do, and they're doing a time and a half. You know that in Nineveh, the animals were made to fast. It's one of the things that blows me away. Every year you read the story. The animals were starved for 3 days. The animals. Men, women, and children, which is not allowed in Jewish law, but the king of Nineveh didn't know that. He was going to be extra careful. He was not going to mess with his God. He knew from experience. You get a direct order, you follow. And what happens? He doesn't. Hashem does not destroy Nineveh. And Yain is disappointed. He was looking forward to the fireworks. Now, why is Yain disappointed? Does anybody know why Yain disappointed? Because how many times has God told things to the Jews and they ignore him? The story of Nineveh is a very sensitive story. Yain runs away. Why is he running away? Because he's thinking about the Jews. I will suffer. A prophet who doesn't deliver his prophecy is the worst sinner. Yain was afraid from the beginning that the king of Nineveh would listen to him. Now, what does he care if the Eibusha saves Nineveh? It's 120,000. It was a gigantic city. In the ancient world, 120,000 people. It's a huge city. Because Nineveh, Yain is thinking about Yidden. A goy gets a direct instruction from the Eibusha and says, listen here, we're doing tshuva. Your chickens are not going to eat for 3 days. We're fasting, doing tshuva. Now, what do the chickens do? It doesn't matter. The Nineveh chickens, they're going to fast. I don't know what's so funny, but okay, thank you for laughing. And the Eibush doesn't do it, and Yain is disappointed. This is the story of Mitzrayim. The Eibush was not going to force the parrot to get the Yidden go. He was going to make him decide. Now, he made it, the kitchen got kind of hot before the Pharaoh submitted, right? The last of the 10 plagues was that all the firstborn died, and the Pharaoh himself was the firstborn, right? It has to be a special dispensation made. He should be alive. So you say, okay, get out of here. But Hashem is not going to let the Yidden go until the Pharaoh lets us go, because Hashem is teaching Goyim. So why is the story in the Chumash? Because every Goy is Mitzrayim. It's not just those people in that time and that place. It's a story for posterity. The Eibishter says to a Goy, you have to listen to me. Right, we live in America. Most Goyim in America believe in God. 80, 90%, I don't know what the numbers are. But not nearly that many believe in Hashgacha Pratis. That God can actually slap you on the wrist or kiss you on the forehead, proverbially. The story of the 10 Makkos is an education to Goyim. And it takes that long to learn a lesson. If Hashem is trying to get them out of Egypt, that's not a big deal. Take them by the hand and walk them out. And dare the Pharaoh to stop them. But it's not the idea. The idea is that Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is about the birth of the Jewish nation, is also about all of mankind. When Hashem gave us the Torah, He gave us 613 commandments, and He gave the Gentiles the 7 laws of Noach. Now, the 7 laws of Noach are called the 7 laws of Noach. When did Noach live? A bunch of years before. But the 7 laws of Noach were given at Har Sinai. That's a little bit funny, right? How could you be given a law that you've had for 500 years or for 1,000 years? And of course, the answer to that question is another question. The Torah was also given before it was given. Adam learned Torah, Noach learned Torah, the others kept the Torah. So there's different levels. The Matan Torah was not only for Jews, it was for non-Jews. And there is an educational process. You should know, God is not in heaven. God is everywhere. And even though God is invisible, there's a guy named Savage. You know who Michael Savage is? I guess that's a negative. Michael Savage, I haven't listened to him in decades. Literally. I don't listen to the radio anymore. Michael Savage is an angry Jew on the radio. Very interesting fellow. And
oh, wait, I know who it is.
Yeah, he's brilliant. He's a genius, but he's really extreme. And he has a shaykhut, he messed with, he was by a Fabrengen, he hung out in the Chabad house by Langer in San Francisco. He has warm feelings to Lubavitch, but he's not a religious man, and he's one of those people who knows everything about everything, and don't you tell him anything, he'll tell you what he thinks whenever you should. But one of his quotes that I remember from all those years ago was, and I think this is brilliant, God watches and waits. Right. Where is God? Right? Everybody does whatever they want. Look at our civilization. It's collapsing around us. The world in which we live has replaced morality with something called lifestyles. And it's really not funny. It is so sad what's become of America. America was a religious country, you know that? Europe was immoral. And the Europeans are embarrassed of us. Everything is a lifestyle. Everything is a lifestyle. A new mishagas, a new lifestyle. Finish. Don't judge. Lifestyle. It's very, very, very sad. Right? So where's God? He has no control. Baharaya, he isn't doing anything. So this is his line. God watches and God has patience. God watches and waits. The story of the 10 plagues is a lesson to the non-Jew. God watches and waits. You can't do whatever you want. It's his world. And he told you how you should behave. And you should follow. So the story of the 10 plagues are written in the Chumash, not because it's exciting for a 6-year-old to hear how the people who were enslaving the Jews suffered, which is how we experienced it as little kids. The Torah is a timeless book. It teaches lessons forever. These details are important, and yes, of course these details, because these details are educational. They're not just historic. They're educational. They teach lessons. They teach lessons to us all, including to non-Jews. So that's why you have 10 plagues, and that's why you have 10 plagues recorded in the Chumash. And then the Rabbi brings a third dimension. And the third dimension is, and this is not really for today, but I'm going to say it anyway, there is not a single word in the Torah that doesn't talk specifically to the Jewish people. So it's true that the 10 plagues happened and are recorded not only because they were the vehicle for the redemption of the Jewish people, but it's a lesson to mankind, but it's also a lesson to every single Jew. The pasuk says, "V'yadu Mitzrayim keri Hashem." The plagues are given that Egypt should know that there is God, and v'yadaitem k'nei Hashem. Jews have to know God. And of course, because of the expectations that Hashem has on Yidden, the lesson of the 10 plagues to Jews is higher and different than the lesson of the 10 plagues that are given to the Egyptians. But the story is written in the Chumash because it's real. It's not just, a miracle is not a big deal. Killing people, especially if you're the Eibush, is not a big deal. And killing is not a good thing. It's a lesson. There's a timeless relevance to it. So let me just tell you what's going on. We did Dam, Tzvadeya. We had a very hard time finding Kinim and Orev. We did Dever. We're holding Shchin, which is the 6th of the 10 Makkos. Last year we did the first 5, for better or for worse. And we had many, many wonderful Sichos that explained the necessity for each. Each is a little different. Each is a bit of a different tweak. Every plague contributes a different aspect. For example, we had a Sicha where the Rebbe said that the first 3 plagues were about punishing the Egyptian god. And because the first 3 plagues were punishing the Egyptian god, Jews and Egyptians suffered from them the same. The 4th was about punishing the Egyptians themselves, and this is where you begin to have the separation between the Jews and the non-Jews. It's just an insight in a Rashi Sikh of the Rebbe that gives you an understanding, and the Rebbe is going to sit and study each plague, not because of the story, but the message. So I guess today's class is again an introduction, but we've come a little closer to a text. Don't lose your text. Next week we're not going to have a class. The week after I'm not going to make you copies. We're doing boils. Shchen. I'll see you in Mitzvah Hashem in 2 weeks. I want to wish everybody and a successful, meaningful Rosh Hashanah filled with 50 hours or 40 hours of warmth and inspiration, upliftedness. Don't get nervous about 770s pushing. Take it in stride. When they push you, bend like a little grass as opposed to a tree that breaks. And use the minutes, use the days, and have a good year. Okay, I'll see you next year.